So now that we have flippers and bumpers working, it's time for us to move on to the next dynamic element, which is the plunger. So we want to actually add that piece that launches the ball into the game. Now, in doing this, we're going to need to expand our level just a little bit to have that initial channel that the ball moves through. Upon doing so, we're going to then work on actually importing the plunger as well as setting up all of its functionality so that when the player holds down the spacebar, the plunger charges up and upon release, it fires the ball away. So to begin with this, I'm going to go into my assets folder and I'm going to import the plunger mesh. So for this, I'm going to again just keep all of the defaults. I'm not going to import materials or textures and just keep it as it is. And I'm just going to click import. Now upon importing it, I'm going to open it up and just quickly check out the collision. Because the thing with the collision here is that we really only need actually kind of a box collision around it. It doesn't need to be this full shape. And the reason for that is I want to make sure that the thing that's launching the ball is never going to have any potential to hit an edge around the outside of this front part here. So I'm actually going to remove the collision that we generated. I'm going to go collision, and I'm just going to add box simplified collision, which adds this for us, which in this context is going to work quite well for us. I'm going to hit save. And now I'm going to quickly modify the map. So at the moment, if we were to launch the ball, it would need to be in some sort of channel on one side. In this situation, what I'm going to be doing is adding a channel just along here, and we're going to expect the plunger to be around this region here. So to do this, the quickest way for me to do it is to get this box that we've already created, and I'm just going to go ahead and expand it just a little bit in geometry mode. So I'm going to click on this edge, and I'm going to pull it out 50, 100, 150, 200 units, just in case. That should be nice. Now we can see how thin the ball itself actually is. I'm going to just use this, since it's in the map at the moment, to kind of size up how wide the channel really needs to be. My gut says we may need an extra couple of centimeters on either side, just in case. So I'm going to go and have a channel that's to within about 10 or 20 units of either side here. Maybe a little bit more. So we'll quickly carve that out. Again, I'm going to do a subtraction brush. So I'm going to get box geometry. I'm just going to drag it in. The quickest way for me to handle this is actually just going to be subtractive and then move it sideways and figure out where we want this to be. Now, that actually works surprisingly well as an initial default value. So, I'm just going to roll with that. Now that that's in, I'm going to get that, and I'm just going to drag this down to the length that we want it to be. I'd say we probably want our plunger to start about there, and we really want that ball to get ejected at the very top. So I'm going to put that here. Finally, I'm going to need to make sure that when the ball comes up, it's going to come out this no matter what. So we really want to make sure that the edge here is going to be in some way, shape or form slanted, so that it can eject all the way out. Now there's a couple of different ways that we could do this. I'm going to start by just extruding this face here. I'm going to push it out about this length. And again, I'm going to click here. I'm going to pull this out just so that it connects. Now I think the quickest way for us to get an extrusion is actually going to be to delete these two vertices. So I'm going to delete them. At which point I'm going to look at this, and I'm going to now make this area that we just deleted into a face. So I'm going to control click on each of these. And then I'm going to hit create. You'll see that that's now gone and created a face for us. So we can now, this should go up. This area could actually still be a little bit slanted, so I'm tempted to broaden it up just a notch. So I'm using the Alt 2, 3, and 4 keys to cycle through those modes here. Yeah, I'm just going to move this back just a notch. There's a couple of different ways I could do this, but the quickest is going to be to just select this face and pull it back, just to make sure that we've got a nice opening for it to pop out. I'd say that's alright. That'll most likely do the trick. It could have even been too much, and I could just be being paranoid, but we'll see. So the next thing that we're going to need to do is actually add in some sort of plunger blueprint into this section just here. Now to add a plunger blueprint, I'm going to go to my blueprint section, I'm going to right click, and I'm going to create myself a new blueprint class. And this is going to be an actor, and I'm just going to call it BP _plunger. Now, fortunately, this is going to be a reasonably simple setup. All I need to do is go to my event graph. I'm going to create two events called charge plunger. Well, sorry, custom events. I'm going to call it charge plunger. And I'm going to make another custom event, which will be known as stop charge. So these can be called from the player controller later. Now, upon doing this, when we go charge the plunger, we want to fire up a timeline. And this timeline is going to be called charge timeline. Now, essentially what it's going to do is gradually move the plunger further and further back until it's stopped into a location. And then when they hit stop charge, we're going to go ahead and do a move component to the initial position over a very short period of time. So charge timeline is going to have a float output that gives it a alpha between starting position and ending position. So I'm going to open this up. I'm going to add a new float track that's just going to be called charge alpha. And this should be reasonably simple. I'm just going to right click and I'm going to right click here. I'm going to add a key, and the first key that I add is going to be at 0, 0. And then the next key is going to be 1 second in. We can be at 1, 1, just ballpark figure. Now, keep in mind that you probably want this to be set to auto, so click on a face and hit 1 and 1, and it'll just do that with the keys. If you wanted to have a more custom setup, I could also add more keys in the middle to kind of like make it move quicker at the start and then slower towards the end. Another way to add these keys is to shift click. So I could add this and I could have something that was more like that. You know, we can tinker with it in whatever way we really see fit. Doesn't matter too much here, so go with whatever you think is going to be good. I'm going to go back to my event graph now, and it's at this time that I need to go to my viewport and add a static mesh, which is going to be the moving component. So this is actually going to be called plunger mesh. I'm just going to set this up to be my plunger. And if you look at this, we essentially want to, as it charges, to move back to here and then fire up again. So to do that, I'm going to go to my event graph, and I'm simply going to do a blend between, just going to take a shot in the dark on how this is going to work, but we're going to lerp a vector between two locations. So this will be 0, 0, 0 is when it's at 0 alpha, and 0, 150, 0 is going to be when it's fully charged. And all I'm going to do is every time this goes to update, I'm going to set the relative location of the plunger mesh. And now that that's hooked up, I'm pretty much good for the creation. This isn't going to have a sound effect or anything like that, but that's okay. Now I'm just going to say that when you go to stop, we're going to do two things. First off, we're going to do a sequence, and the first stage of this sequence is going to be to stop this charge. The next stage is going to be a move component to on the plunger mesh. So I'm actually going to drag this in, control click, and I'm going to type in move components to, and I'm just going to move it to 0, 0. So to do that, I can just leave all of these as default, and I'm going to say I want it to move there in 0.1 seconds. Sounds good. Compile, save. Now the final part in getting this working is just going to be going back to the project settings and adding myself a new bind to handle this. So I'm just going to add an action mapping, and it's going to be called plunger. And by default, I'm going to bind it to the spacebar. And now, if I go to my controller, I'm going to set up how this functions. Pinball player controller. I'm going to right click and I'm going to go input plunger. Now, if you think about it, to do this, we really need a reference to the current plunger. And the nicest way for us to really do this is actually going to be in that initial function where we have detect flippers. I think it's a good idea for us to create another one that is detect plunger. So I'm going to create a quick custom event, detect plunger, that is just going to do a gets all actors of class. So it's going to look for every plunger in the world. And we're going to get the very first one that it finds, because we don't need any more than that. And I'm going to promote that to a variable called plunger. Now bear in mind that if you do it this way, and there's no plunger in the world, when you press spacebar, it will throw an error, because it's not going to know what to do, because this variable will be set to null if there's nothing in this array. We can fix that with validity checks, or we can fix it with print strings and log messages, but I think for the time being we can leave it and just acknowledge it as a potential thing. So the plunger is going to, on pressed, it is going to call charge plunger, and on released it's going to call stop charge. So the next thing that we need to do is make sure that our detect plunger function is being called on begin play right after detect flippers. So I'm just going to call detect plunger, and then we really just need to add the plunger to the world. So I'm going to drag that in. I'm going to make it considerably bigger. That's probably too big. 6, I guess. That'll do. Let's have a look at how that goes. Going to add that just very quickly, and I'm going to make the just aligned, sticking out of the end here. And now we should be detecting the plunger. Upon doing so, we're going to be trying to charge it and stop it. One thing that's worth noting is that if I go to the plunger, at the moment this is my setup, and this is actually going to cause a problem, because if I charge the plunger, it's going to play the timeline. And when it plays the timeline, it's going to update its location, and that's all going to be fine. Eventually we're going to stop it, and then it's going to call stop and push it back somewhere. But the timeline will still be in a different location, so that when I hit play next time, it's actually not going to play from where it should be. It'll play from halfway through the timeline. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to control click on play and connect that to play from start instead. And now compile, save, play. I can charge up and I can fire into the game, at which point I can then play it. Now that we know it works, there's really only one thing to do, which is to go to assets, and I'm going to load up the plunger, and I'm just going to set its material to be a simple metal. I'm going to save it out, and you can see now that the material is being applied. So if I hit play again, everything works fine. So let's move on to the next section, which is going to be actually setting up all of the game rules so that the ball correctly resets after it makes this mistake.